I'll do again. Going back over to France this time. I've done a couple of videos on France recently. Something a little bit different. You've probably already heard in the news, but the French have just passed a bill relating to migration. I've seen bits of it on the news and stuff, but I've not yet looked into it. So I'm quite excited. I don't know if you can tell by my face, full of emotion right now. The joy of autism and how it allows you to express so many emotions. But anyway, I'll crack on. French MPs pass controversial immigration reform. Now, I believe before I read this, that I do think that this bill would have passed even if Le Pen's Front National hadn't have voted for it. But I think it's just the fact that she's given it a full-bodied support, which is kind of put egg on Emmanuel Macron's face, really. And isn't a good look for him. But I think it does show that the winds of change are starting to blow in the other direction, and we are starting to see parties move. Although the EU have just recently passed a law the same day this was passed to do with redistribution of refugees and migrants. I don't fully understand it because, again, I've not looked into that properly, but I think that's something along the lines of, and this is more to do with, although Denmark are exempt from it, but I think it's to do with moving migrants around, and countries can't refuse to accept them or something like that. So you could end up, even with France doing this, they could end up still having loads and loads of migrants being dumped on the doorstep by the EU itself. So, and as we all know from the Brexit debates and all these ECHR claims that we've had and things, that these supranational organisations generally take precedence over national governments now, at least in Europe anyway. The French Parliament has passed legislation toughening France's immigration policy. The amended bill was backed by both President Emmanuel Macron's centrist Renaissance Party and Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally. I don't think they are far-right, to be honest with you. They are nationalistic, but when you look at a lot of their policies, they're very much into like workers' union style workers' rights, and like high minimum wages, and things that you would call traditional left wing policies. Like centralized control over a lot of industry, things like that. And high import taxes on foreign imports and stuff. Things like that. Stuff that, like I say, you would consider to be incredibly left wing. So I think to call them far right is very disingenuous by the media, and I think they know that as well. And I did say this before about some of the tricks that they play with words in general media, and it is quite slimy, really, with how they try to shape perceptions on things. And this is the BBC as well, so they should know better. Oh, sorry, I should have said at the beginning of the video as well. I will put the link for the article below. Please visit the site yourself. Read through it. Make your own mind up. Don't just listen to what some nut job on YouTube is saying and his wacky wild opinions. The vote divided. Mr. Macron's party and Health Minister Aurélien Rousseau resigned in protest. Sorry if I've butchered the name. I do, with the exception of maybe Je m'appelle David and oui. That's about the limits of my French reading or speaking capabilities. So probably absolutely butchered that person's name. Oh well, his fault for being French, I guess. Leaders of a third of French regions said they would not comply with certain measures in the law. A previous draft was rejected by Parliament last week when the National Rally, as well as the left, voted against. In response, the government redrafted the bill, making some of its provisions tougher. The new legislation makes it more difficult for migrants to bring family members to France and delays their access to welfare benefits. Both very, very sensible sounding policies up to now. Chain migration is an absolute bane, in my opinion, of the migration system. I don't think it should be allowed. And I think if we have chain migration, I think then we should also have, by default, chain deportation as well. So when you start deporting people, we should then start linking other people to those deportations, just as people are allowed to be linked onto immigrations into the countries. I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to say. And I think it would encourage good behaviour, because whole communities would start saying to people, you'd better start packing that in because I don't want to leave. And I tell you what, if you get us all deported, wait till we get back home, then you'll have it. And I think that would be a massive motivating factor to people behaving properly. It also bans detaining minors in detention centres. I'll have to think about that. I'm not sure. I'm not certain about my opinion on that, to be honest with you. Because in France we have seen some teachers being murdered by minors. So just because somebody's a minor doesn't mean they're necessarily innocent. I'm old enough to remember James Bulger, and it was Robert Thompson and John Venables who offed on young James Bulger, which was absolutely tragic. 3 years old he was, and they absolutely brutalised him. I've known some. I used to work with somebody it was either his brother or his brother-in-law. I think it was his brother-in-law. Used to be CID in Liverpool, and they obviously couldn't release a lot of the injuries that were received by young James. He said he got told some. He spoke to me about some of them. I can't say I'm not going to say anything online for that. But even his brother, this person, or whoever he was, wouldn't tell him he wouldn't tell him everything. He told him some of these injuries that he received that were horrific. He said, but some of them were terrible. He said, they would literally traumatise people from what those two boys did. And those boys were about 10 years old when they did that to him. So I'm afraid just because somebody's a minor does not mean that they can't be incredibly dangerous or evil. In fact, they absolutely can be. So So again, I'm not yet made, and that's obviously not a generalisation on all minors, and they are rare. I'm going to be very clear, that's a very, very rare thing. But it's rare for adults as well to do horrible things like that. But I've not fully made my mind up on that. A controversial provision discriminates between citizens and migrants, even those living in the country legally, in determining eligibility for benefits. We shouldn't get any, multiple years before you're eligible for it. The tougher version appealed to the right-wing party. I mean, that's if ever. I don't know. I mean, I'm starting to get to the point now where I think why should you receive anything? I don't even think we should be granting people right for permanent residency anymore. I think there should be like maybe a 10-year limit or something. You come over here, work for 10 years. Right, thanks for your time, you're gone. See ya. Who backed it on Monday? Miss Le Pen welcomed the amended bill, calling it an ideological victory for the far right. This is our bill, said Eric Ciotti, the leader of the right-wing Republican Party. He called it firm and courageous. But left-wingers said Mr. Macron was enabling the far right. History will remember those who betrayed their convictions, Socialist Party leader Olivier Faure said. 32 of France's 101 departments, including Paris, have said they would refuse to implement the provisions of the law on benefits for non-citizens. I mean, a city like Paris saying they wouldn't do it would be like Sadiq Khan saying he wouldn't do it, which would be absolutely non-surprising at all. And really, this is where we need to start bringing in treason and dereliction of duty laws against civil servants and public servants who refuse to enact legislation that has been legally and lawfully passed regarding national security. And it should be treated as national security, this. The French vote came hours before an EU agreement to reform... Oh, I was saying about that before. The French vote came hours before an EU agreement to reform the asylum system across the bloc's 27 member states. The new pact, agreed by EU governments and European Parliament members, includes creating border detention centres and enabling the quicker deportation of rejected asylum seekers. Hailed as a landmark agreement by Parliament President Roberta Metsola, the new system allows asylum seekers to be relocated from southern member states, which have the highest number of arrivals, to other countries. Yeah, it still has to be formally approved by the Parliament and member states. It will be. If they've already voted it in, that's it. It'll fly through now. It'll just be a rubber stamping exercise. What's happening to it now? The new French legislation exposed divisions within the governing alliance. 27 MPs voted against, while 32 abstained. Almost a quarter of pro-Macron MPs. Health Minister Aurélien Rousseau, who was a member of the Communist Party in his youth, stepped down in protest of the immigration law. What a surprise! A communist being in support of mass migration. Who'd have thought it, eh? Communists in the parliament wanting mass immigration. Oh, that's telling, isn't it? And for those of you who don't know, mass immigration was a core tenet of the Soviet Union. A big part of it, and I firmly believe this is part of why it's happening in Europe, but a big reason why Russia has got one of the largest disparate populations in the world of people who've been moved around, and it all comes from the Soviet Union period. And the idea was that, and this is true, people have a connection to land, to where they live, where they've grown up, and where the family are from, etc. And you can say that's logical or illogical. I'm not trying to debate the ethics of that in any way, shape, or form. Put my touchpad down. Well, it's story time. But people do care. And when you've got people who, like, I live in Lancashire, I love Lancashire, carefree, you know, it's in my blood. Even though I was born in Germany, I'm English and I'm a Lancastrian. That is who I am. You know, it's in my blood, and that can never be taken away. You can't educate that out of me. It's just a fact. And my family as well. But if you bring somebody from halfway across the world, I don't know, let's say Zimbabwe, what do they care about Lancashire? If there's a cot like in Preston, there's plenty of cotton mills, old cotton mills as an example. Why would a bunch of students from China and Zimbabwe and I don't know India who are staying in the University of Central Lancashire in Preston, what would they care if a heritage cotton mill got torn down and got replaced with student accommodation? They're not going to care at all. What are they going to care about if laws start getting changed overnight, which repeal our rights to our hard fought for rights for, say, freedom of speech that we've enjoyed for nearly 2 centuries now in this country? They're not really going to care because they have no connection to the land. And that was the whole point of the Soviet Union doing that, of intentionally moving people around. It was so people were dispossessed from where they lived and didn't care what rules and laws were passed in that area. And it allowed them to be more tyrannical than what they could have been if people were still where they were originally from. Because people in their homeland with strong community bonds and strong familial bonds won't tolerate that rubbish. Anyway, back to the story. Some measures in the bill make me very uncomfortable, says Yale Brun Pivet, the president of the lower house of parliament and a member of Macron's party. The bill would have passed if Le Pen's party had abstained, though not if it had voted against. That's interesting. The government pointed to the size of its majority to argue that it did not depend on national rally votes. Well, clearly it did then, because if they had voted against it, they would have lost. Speaking after the vote, the Prime Minister accepted some measures in the law might not be constitutional. So what's happening here? Well, I'll read the rest of the story quickly and then I'll explain it. We will ask the Constitutional Council, she told French radio, referring to a top court which upholds the Constitution's principles. Human rights groups denounced the new reform as the most regressive immigration law for decades. Mr. Macron's party lost its majority in Parliament in elections in June 22. Since then, the government has frequently found itself unable to win votes in Parliament. Yeah, so this Constitutional Council is kind of like the Supreme Court in America, not the British Supreme Court, which I think should be scrapped, but the US Supreme Court, which is a court, I believe, that only deals in constitutional matters. So they won't necessarily rule on whether somebody, say, committed murder or not. They would rule on whether his or her imprisonment, let's say, was constitutional, or if the trial was constitutional or in accordance to the Constitution. Like if they just put him in, if the person in prison without trial, that would then go to the US Supreme Court, I believe, as a matter of the Constitution in itself, but not to do with, say, federal or state law, though. And that's what this Constitutional Council is in France. They look, but they don't have to go to this Constitutional Council. Like if, and I think what this is that Prime Minister who doesn't support this has the power to send things there for ratification. And I think it's basically them doing it out of spite to try and block the bill going through, basically. That's what it seems to be, that they're playing politics with it. I don't know enough about the French system to say whether or not it'll go through. I know they are quite strict when it comes to the Constitution over there. They even going as far as they've got a Constitutional Council, I can't remember what it's called, but to do with the French language. So like over here, the Oxford Dictionary will just throw in new words every year because they can. Just if enough people are saying a word, they'll just chuck it in a dictionary and they might take some out. There's not really any debate on it, it's just, that's it. They don't really lecture anybody on how to say words properly or things like that, you know, it's just, but in France, they're very, very strict. Even going so far as I think to ban the use of say like English words like television or microwave or internet. They have to have they create their own very specific French equivalent words for a lot of that sort of stuff. Anyway, I've whittled on far too long with that and gone right off topic a few times. As I say, I'll put the link below for the article itself. Please have a read of it yourself, make your own mind up. Don't just listen to me jabbering on. If you've found that interesting or informative, or it's piqued your interest in any way, or got your emotions going, please like, subscribe and put a comment below. Thank you and goodbye for now.